April 24, 1944. The air level was 24,000 feet above Brandenburg. With each hard breath, the mask fogged up as Major G.A. Rowell pushed himself back into the back of his messy Bf-109 G6. Shocked as they watched the American fighter kept going after it through the turn to dive. His headphones made noise. When Yakashada's sounds got scared, 11's best pilots, men who had been in charge the clouds over Europe since 1940, are now crying warnings like they're beginners. The high in Indiana at 6 o'clock. He's still with me. At 400 kilometers per hour. What is he still doing with her? Me? Royal had lived by it. The iron rule of air combat. American warriors couldn't keep up with German warriors. Home. They didn't have enough range. They didn't have the performance at high altitude. They didn't have how fast it is at height. But the P-51 Mustang, his eyes fixed on his partner, shook every belief that had been held. Germany has had pilots living since 1941. It had a Merlin engine made by Packard that sang a death song from a height where American lightning and thunder had sounded. To get air 600 from where it started in England, this pony still had petrol for an hour more of battle and the trip back home. Rowell's own tank gauge showed 15 minutes to the Brandenburg. How to do maths with air. Distance, height, superiority. In a single, endurance had turned around. Good morning. The hunters turned into the look for their own city. What? Major saw that April morning was not just a new fighter plane from the U.S., but the start of the Luftwaffe's planned destruction. After only 1 year, the force that had Europe in fear would lose 75% of its 90% of its skilled leaders or pilots, and full air superiority over Poland and Germany. The thing that did this damage was in planes that were made in just 102 days. It has a British engine that was built in, amounts that didn't follow German, understand, and driven by pilots who they seemed to grow faster than they could. It might get shot down. The trouble had been building since August 17, 1943, when the U.S. 8th Air Force lost 60 B-7 flying fortifications in 1 day of attack. Jefferson County and Reagan County. The math behind the bombing plan had reached a very important turning point. American bombs were going through 22. Deep entry raids lose 25% of their power, while Germany was making fighters actually going up despite the bombing. General Adolf Galland, Major General. The numbers had been looked over by Diegfleger with satisfaction in his home office at Berlin. The United States was losing attackers faster than they could train. Crews, 10 guys, 10 women, were in each B-17. Highly skilled experts who needed 2 months of getting ready. Weaver planes, 10 jet pilots in exchange for 1. People on bomber crews, an exchange rate. That was clearly in favor of Germany. American troops need to go back to Argonne. In September, Galland told his staff, 1943, their fighters don't have the range to follow. Besides the rinse. This means we can bring our troops together and wait for the is told to turn around and then kills the planes whenever we want. The plan was beginning to work. In October, March 14, 43, the 8th Air Force lost on Black Thursday. Another raid had 60 bombs and 650 men go to Schweinfurt. As the American bombing operation got underway, a stop for 4 months. There were no big raids. Went all the way through to Germany. It looked like Luftwaffe had won the fight. To have better air power through the easy. Because of geography. Not knowing that. A celebration of German fighters. An amazing merger of technologies. Genius and power in business was already taking away their win. The P-51 Mustang from North America had been born in April because of a British need. 1940, thought up in just 102 days with. The first version took off just 149 days after. Signing a contract, a growth speed. That couldn't have happened in any other country. At first driven by the first Mustangs had an Allison V1710 engine. Had been let down above 15,000 feet, right where bomber escort was. Had to. But in April 1942, Rolls-Royce, Ronald Harker, a test pilot, had said, putting the Merlin on the Mustang engine. This union of American, better handling, and more British power would make the most powerful fighter in the war. A plane. The Packard Motor Company in Detroit had begun making licensed versions of They made the Merlin engine in August 1941, using mass production in the U.S. Skills with British accuracy. Making things. Packard was building a lot of Merlin engines. Every month, each one giving pretty much 1,650 horsepower up high, were German. The pilots had felt the best. Colonel Thomas Hitchcock, the American movie star, in London and was a pilot in World War I, had written a report about coming events in July 1942. The Merlin-powered P-51 will be better than any other fighter in the world above 25,000 feet. It'll have the range to help bombs get to Berlin and come back. One plane like this could change the whole state of military affairs in Europe. On December 1, 1943, a group of Focke-Wulf FW-19s from Jägerschwadron 2 went up to an American bombs near Solingen, sure that the guards had gone back. It was the planes, warriors who have logged thousands of wins, following a well-practiced plan. They had gotten better at their attack plan over 18 months, dropping off the escort, a staff leader who was watching the thunderbolts from the P-47 flapping their wings in goodbye bombs, starting how to attack. But as the FW-19s, they rolled into an attack dive. Voices could be heard over their radios. People from India who are still with the bombers. New type, keeping the escort. P-8-51. Birds of prey of the 354th Fighter Group. The Pioneer Mustang Group was still there, with the bombers. Their drop tanks had given them an extra 150 miles of range, enough to cover a lot of escorts. Into the German. The pilots from Germany. If it goes uncontested for 18 months. Bombers who were not accompanied were attacked. Psychologically not ready for fighter opposition from this far away. December 13, 1943 brought a more comprehensive shock. The first major raid with substantial P-51 escort penetrated to Kiel for 120 miles from the nearest Allied base. 16 P-51Bs of the 354th Fighter Group not only escorted the bombers, but engaged in aggressive fighter sweeps, hunting German fighters. Rather than waiting to be attacked, Major Georg Peter Shaw, Otta commanding 3JG-1 encountered the Mustangs near Bremen. A veteran with 78 victories, Otta had developed specific tactics for each Allied fighter type. The P-47 could be outmaneuvered at altitude. The Spitfire lacked range. The P-38 Lightning couldn't turn with German fighters, but the P-51 defied categorization. First contact at 7,500 m altitude. Eder reported to YAG Corps headquarters. Enemy fighters maintained speed and maneuverability superior to our Bf-109G. At this height, pursued my Starl for 30 km before fuel considerations forced us to land. Enemy continued escort mission without apparent fuel concerns. Oberfeld W.L. Heinz Koka, a 33 victory ace with JG-11, wrote in his diary on December 20th, the appearance of American fighters over Hanover has shaken everyone. We used to take off leisurely when bombers approached, knowing we had time to gain altitude and position. Now we must climb immediately or risk being bounced by escorts. The war has come to our doorstep. The P-51B's performance statistics when German intelligence finally obtained accurate data in January 1944 caused disbelief at the highest levels of the Luftwaffe. Speed 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet faster than any German fighter at altitude range. 280 mi with drop tanks, double that of any German fighter ceiling. 42,000 feet. Service ceiling, higher than comfortable. Operating altitude for German pilots. Climb 3,475 ft per minute. Superior to the Bf-109G. Above 20,000 feet armament 650 caliber. Machine guns with 1,880 rounds. Enough for extended combat. The Mustangs. Laminina flow wing provided unprecedented efficiency. The wings shape maintained smooth airflow to 60% of its chord, reducing drag by 30% compared to conventional designs. This single innovation provided the speed and range that made long-range escort possible. February 20th to 25th, 1944, Big Week brought the full weight of American air power against German aircraft. Production: over 1,000 bombers and 900 fighters, including 150 P-51 struck aircraft factories across Germany in coordinated raids. For the first time, American fighters weren't merely escorting, they were hunting. The Luftwaffe lost 355 fighters during Big Week, but more critically, approximately 100 experienced pilots were killed, including dozens of formation leaders. These Staffelkapitän and Gruppen Kommandure represented irreplaceable tactical knowledge. Their loss would cascade through the fighter force, leaving inexperienced pilots without mentorship. March 4, 1944 marked a watershed. The first American bombing raid on Berlin, with fighter escort 660 B-17 and B-24s, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, P-38 Lightnings, and P-47 Thunderbolts, darkened the sky over the Reich capital. Adolf Galland himself flew against the raid, leading a scratch force of Bf-109gs. His after-action report to Goering was brutally honest. "We were outnumbered 3-1 by escort fighters. The Mustangs had altitude advantage, speed advantage, and tactical advantage. We managed to damage 3 bombers before being scattered. I personally was chased for 50 kilometers by 2 Mustangs who had fuel to toy with me like cats with a mouse." The appearance of American fighters over Berlin shattered the last pretense of German air superiority. Civilians who had been told the Luftwaffe was winning watched silver Mustangs flying loops over the Brandenburg Gate. The regime's credibility, already strained by military defeats, crumbled further. By April 1944, P-51 pilots had developed a devastating tactic. After completing escort duties, they would descend to treetop level and strafe targets of opportunity on the return flight. German airfields, previously safe once Allied formations passed overhead, became killing grounds. April 13, 1944, exemplified the new reality. After escorting bombers to Schweinfurt, 42 Mustangs from the 4th Fighter Group descended on German airfields across Bavaria. In 30 minutes of concentrated strafing, they destroyed 51 aircraft on the ground, damaged 23 more, killed dozens of ground personnel, and destroyed irreplaceable maintenance facilities. By May 1944, the Luftwaffe faced a catastrophic pilot shortage. Monthly losses exceeded 25% of operational strength, while training programs produced increasingly inferior replacements. The average German fighter pilot in 1944 received 110 to 160 flight hours before combat compared to 400 hours for American pilots and the 250 hours German pilots had received in 1941. By early 1945, some German pilots entered combat with as little as 80 hours total flight time. Aust Johannes Mackie Steinhoff, commanding JG-77, documented the crisis. "We received children as replacements. Boys of 19 with minimal training who have never flown above 5,000 m, never fired at a moving target, never experienced hygiene maneuvers. We must send them against American pilots with 400 hours training, many with previous combat experience." The quality differential became a force multiplier for American effectiveness. Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group, who would score 21 aerial victories, observed, "By spring 44, half the German pilots we encountered were easy kills. They'd fly predictable patterns, failed to use clouds for cover, and panic when bounced. The old hands were still dangerous. You could tell immediately by how they flew, but they were increasingly rare." The strategic bombing campaign against German oil facilities intensified in May 1944, created an additional crisis that multiplied the P-51's advantages. German aviation fuel production plummeted from 180,000 tons in April to 20,000 tons by September. Training flights were curtailed, then eliminated. Combat operations were restricted to decisive engagements. Meanwhile, American pilots flew training missions. Over Germany itself, P-51 groups would conduct fighter sweeps, offensive patrols designed to find and destroy German aircraft. With unlimited fuel, American pilots could loiter over German airfields, waiting for defenders to take off, then attack them at their most vulnerable moment. The introduction of the Messerschmitt M262 jet fighter in summer 1944 briefly raised German hopes. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, the M262 was 100 miles per hour faster than the P-51D. Hitler saw it as a wonder weapon that would reverse the air war's trajectory. But the P-51 pilots quickly developed tactics to counter the jets. They would loiter near Me-262 airfields, attacking the jets during takeoff and landing when they were slow and vulnerable. The Mustang's superior range meant they could wait patiently for opportunities. The Me-262's technological superiority was nullified by operational realities. The jets required high-grade fuel, increasingly unavailable. Their engines needed replacement every 10 to 25 hours, impossible with disrupted supply chains. Most critically, they required experienced pilots for effective operation. But the Luftwaffe had few veterans remaining. Notable Mi-262 pilots like Franz Schau, credited with shooting down 10 P-51s, and Georg Peter Ada, who claimed 9 P-51s. Among his 12 jet victories achieved individual successes, but these victories had no strategic impact. For every Mustang shot down, dozens more appeared. By autumn 1944, P-51s had shifted focus to Germany's transportation network, operating in squadron strength units. They attacked locomotives, rail yards, bridges, and canal locks. The German economy, dependent on rail transport, began systematic collapse. On September 11, 1944, 36 P-51s from the 357th Fighter Group destroyed 81 locomotives in a single day. The 357th Fighter Group would eventually claim the highest number of air victories, 595.5, of any P-51 group in the 8th Air Force. Reichsminister Albert Speer wrote in his diary, "The American fighters have achieved what the heavy bombers couldn't: complete transportation. Paralysis. Coal cannot reach power plants. Parts cannot reach factories. Food cannot reach cities." Beyond statistics and strategy, the P-51's dominance inflicted profound psychological trauma on German pilots. Men who had entered service as elite warriors experienced complete demolition of their worldview. The Mustang pilots displayed a confidence that demoralized German opponents. They flew aggressive aerobatics over German cities, performed victory rolls over airfields they had just strafed, and dominated every engagement with overwhelming numbers and superior training. German pilots developed fatalistic humor about their situation. A joke circulated through fighter units. What does a German fighter pilot need for an Iron Cross? Answer: a P-51 escort to the cemetery. The gallows humor masked deep demoralization. April 7, 1945 witnessed the Sonda Commando Ella operation, one of the Luftwaffe's final large-scale missions. Approximately 180 to 200 B-109s piloted, mostly by inexperienced volunteers, attempted to ram American bombers in a desperate suicide mission. The results were catastrophic. American fighters claimed approximately 130 to 140 German aircraft destroyed while losing minimal numbers themselves. The Luftwaffe effectively ceased to exist as a fighting force after April 1945. Though aircraft and pilots remained, the will to fight had evaporated. Unit commanders stopped ordering missions. The once proud force that had terrorized Europe was reduced to hiding its remaining aircraft. The final statistics of the P-51's impact tell the complete story. P-51 production and combat record. Total produced 15,586 aircraft. Enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat 4,950. Confirmed. Enemy aircraft destroyed on ground 4,131. Confirmed. P-51s lost to all causes 2,520. Kill ratio approximately 3.6 to 1 in. Aerial combat. German pilot losses. Western Front 1944 over 8,000 killed. Missing. 1945 January to May over 3,000. Killed missing. Total fighter pilot. Force decimated. Luftwaffe strength. Decline January 1944. Approximately 1,600. Operational fighters. June 1944. 1,480. Operational fighters. January 1945. 1,000 operational fighters. April 1945. 325 operational fighters. Training. Hours. Comparison. American pilots 1944 to 45 for 100+ hours before combat. German pilots early 1944. 160 to 220 hours. German pilots late 1944. 110 to 160 hours. German pilots 1945. Some as low as 80 hours. Military. Historians universally acknowledge the P-51's decisive role in achieving Allied air superiority. The United States strategic bombing survey concluded the P-51 fighter more than any other single weapon won air superiority over Europe. The P-51 made possible 3 critical achievements: the continuation of the daylight strategic bombing campaign, the achievement of air superiority before D-Day, the systematic destruction of German transportation and oil infrastructure, North American aviation's production miracle deserves recognition. The company produced 1 completed Mustang approximately every 90 minutes at peak production. The Englewood and Dallas plants together employed tens of thousands of workers, with women comprising 40% of the workforce. This production achievement contrasted starkly with German manufacturing. While exact German production figures remain disputed due to incomplete records, it's clear that American fighter production far exceeded German capacity. The United States produced more P-51s alone than Germany produced of all single-engine fighter types combined in 1944 to 45. The American pilot training system proved as decisive as the aircraft itself. By 1944, the United States Army Air Forces operated one of history's largest educational programs. Each pilot progressed through primary training 65 hours, basic training 75 hours, advanced training 100 hours, operational training 160+ hours. This systematic approach produced pilots who arrived at combat units with 400+ hours of flight time, including extensive gunnery practice, formation flying, and combat tactics. German pilots, by contrast, increasingly arrived at frontline units barely able to handle their aircraft, let alone fight effectively. The P-51's influence extended beyond World War II. It demonstrated that air superiority resulted from systemic advantages, training, production, logistics, and technology integration, not individual pilot skill or aircraft performance alone. Former Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland later admitted the P-51 was not necessarily superior to German fighters in every aspect, but it was good enough in all aspects, produced in overwhelming numbers, flown by well-trained pilots, and supported by unlimited resources. This combination was unbeatable. At a 1975 NATO conference, General Gunther Rau, who survived the war with 275 victories, reflected on the P-51's impact. The Mustang didn't just defeat the Luftwaffe, it destroyed the very concept of air superiority as we understood it. We thought in terms of individual combat, pilot skill, tactical victories. The Americans thought in terms of systems, production, and strategic dominance. They were fighting a different war, and they won. The transformation was complete. The Luftwaffe that had swept across Europe from 1939 to 1941, that had come within sight of victory over Britain, that had dominated the Eastern Front, was systematically destroyed by American industrial democracy given wings. The P-51 Mustang was the instrument of this destruction, but the true weapon was the society that produced it, a society capable of designing an aircraft in 102 days, manufacturing over 15,000 of them, training thousands of pilots to professional standards, and projecting this power across oceans to achieve total air superiority. The German pilots who dismissed American fighters in 1943 never expected the P-51 to crush the Luftwaffe because they never understood the nation behind it. They saw aircraft where they should have seen assembly lines. They counted pilots where they should have counted training programs. They measured range where they should have measured industrial capacity. By the time they understood the true nature of American power, it was too late. The hunters had become the hunted, and the European skies belonged to the Mustangs. The Luftwaffe's destruction was not just a military defeat, but a demonstration that free societies, fully mobilized, could generate power beyond the comprehension of totalitarian systems. In the end, the P-51 Mustang proved that victory in modern war came not from warrior spirit or racial superiority, but from the mundane realities of industrial production, systematic training, and logistical excellence. The German pilots never expected to be crushed by the P-51 because they never expected to face the unlimited productive capacity of American democracy. When they finally understood, their understanding came from the wrong end of 6.50 50 caliber machine guns high above the burning ruins of the Third Reich.